Hey there, it's Melissa Brunetti, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Karma podcast.
They didn't know, and from my perspective, I shouldn't have survived. There were a lot of reasons why I shouldn't have survived those circumstances.
Hey there, Karma crew. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Mind Your Own Karma, the Adoption Chronicles. Today, I have Dr. Liz DeBetta on the show. She's a creator of Migrating Toward Wholeness, is an adoptee and independent scholar, activist, and artist committed to changing systems and helping people navigate trauma through creative processes. She believes that stories are powerful change agents, and when we write them and share them, we connect and heal. Liz is a proud member of Actors Equity, SAG-AFTRA, affiliate faculty at the Institute for Research on Women and Gender, and part of the Diversity Scholars Network at the National Center for Institutional Diversity at the University of Michigan. She has published articles on auto-ethnography and adoptee narratives, has an award-winning one-woman show called Unmothered, and facilitates trauma-informed healing workshops for adoptees and women. Here is my interview with Dr. Liz DeBetta. So we are welcoming Liz to the show today. Hi, Liz.
Hi.
So I just wanted to say, I found your book, Adoptees and Writing to Heal, for myself, so validating in so many ways. So I just want to start off by thanking you for that. It's different from all of the adoptee books I've read so far. And what I love the most is that what you write about is so universal for all adoptees, and it doesn't really matter what your story is. So I love that. The details really don't matter. And just so many validating statements for myself. And I know other people would think the same. And you put in the book, you wrote, trauma rewires an adoptee's brain and reorganizes the way we respond to different situations. And for me, just hearing that one sentence was like, yes. It's scientific fact. It is scientific fact that adoption rewires our brain. We're not weird. We're not strange. We're not broken. We're adopted. And so I just want to thank you for that. Just straight up off the top. But let's get into the book in a minute. I just kind of want to hear your adoption story, what you know about it, why you were adopted, and so we can kind of get a feel for where you're coming from.
Sure. Yeah. And thank you for that comment about the book. And I know we're going to get into talking about that later, but it's validating for me to hear that, because that's such a big part of why I do what I do and why I use my story, as a central point of all of the work that I do for myself and with other adoptees. Because I do find that our stories, our internal experiences are so connected, despite the difference in our individual circumstances. And so that's a good segue into my story, which is, like all of our stories, complicated, and emotional, and, always in flux. So I'm a domestic infant adoptee here in the US. And so I was a white kid adopted into a white family in the late 70s, 1977. I'm one of two adopted kids in my family, or now we are adults. And I have an older brother who is 14 months older than I am. And from, sort of what I've been told my whole life, sort of unusual to have two kids adopted into the same family, relatively close proximity, again, 14 months apart. The story that I was told about that was that my mom was home already raising my brother, and I was born prematurely, and they didn't know what kind of needs I might have, and that the adoption agency felt like that my family might be a good fit in case I had special needs or extra needs because of my, being born 2 pounds, 11 ounces. And in the 1970s in the NICU, before the NICU was the NICU that we know it to be today. And so like, and so the story that my parents have told is one that basically says that, they got this call and, we have a baby girl who's going to need to have a family, and do you want another baby? And they were like, yeah, of course we want another baby. Right.
Wow.
And, and the story was very much that, they felt like my parents would be a good fit because my mom was already home and in case I had these extra needs or whatever. But it was all sort of really TBD because they didn't know, and from my perspective, like I shouldn't have survived. There were a lot of reasons why I shouldn't have survived those circumstances. And that is not lost on me, and that's the thing that I always kind of carry with me is like, that little baby Liz was like, nah, I got something to do.
I got something to do.
I got something to do in this life. Don't worry about it. I'm not fully cooked, but I'm going to get there. Right.
Right.
And so like, that's part of the like sort of origin story. And, there's a little bit of like, saviorism and glorification of my adoptive parents in that, which I can see now in retrospect as an adult looking at that story. But I was also told that my first parents or first family wanted me to go to a Catholic family, that they would not sign a religious release on any of the paperwork, and that they wanted me to go to people with college degrees. And so that was sort of my entrance narrative, right? How come I got adopted, how I ended up in my family, all that jazz. I found out many years later that most of that wasn't actually true. Because when I was about 20, I started to have some significant like mental health challenges and relationship issues, and decided, maybe I need to think about my adoption. Maybe that's something. And so I had requested my non-identifying information at that point and got the file in the mail. And, it was 1997, I'm going to say. So internet baby stages, we don't know, it was hard to find any information. We didn't have the access then that we do now. And so I kind of like explored it for a while, but didn't get very far, and then put it away for many years and didn't get back to it. And, it's all of it's challenging because half of the information that was in that paperwork turned out to also not be true.
Wow. So you must have found your biological family.
Yeah. So in 2017, I had just that, right couple weeks before the beginning of 2017, gotten a DNA kit for Christmas from my partner. And because we were very much having these conversations about, okay, now is the time for me to start to search. Like, I think I'm ready in my life and I'm prepared to do the things that I need to do to try to find my first mom. And so he was like, well, let me get your DNA kit. Right. So did that, spit in the tube, sent it away. And then a couple of days later, had come across an article that was posted in one of the adoptee groups that I was on Facebook, part of on Facebook. And somebody, posted this article that New Jersey, where I was adopted, had changed the laws to allow for partial access to original birth certificates. And I was like, oh, wow, this is great timing. So I sent away for that. It took me 3 tries because the paperwork is so opaque and the directions were not clear. And they kept sending it back saying, you forgot this, or you sent the wrong, proof of identity or whatever BS.
Yeah.
And so, it was a sort of couple months, almost 2 months long process. And then on my 40th birthday, I got the envelope in the mail from
Wow.
the New Jersey records.
Wow.
And I will never forget it because there was a snowstorm and I was working from home that day, and I waited until my partner got home, and then I was like, look at this, and then we opened it after we had dinner, and that was like a strange and kind of wonderful birthday gift, I guess, 40 years later.
Yeah.
And I found out my first mom's name. There was no biological father listed on the birth certificate, nor did I have a name. I was just baby.
Wow.
And
How does that feel? How does that feel?
yeah, I know this is a challenge for a lot of adopted people, right? Either the finding out of I had a different name or like not being named. And, I don't have any deep feelings about it. It just all feels kind of strange,
Mhm.
And for a long time, I had a big separation in internally about like my baby self and
Yeah.
my actual self. Like it
Yes.
took me a long time in therapy, and particularly EMDR, to sort of integrate those parts of myself, right?
Mhm.
Because I didn't feel real, and I didn't feel connected to baby Liz in any way. Like I would look at, the very, the I have this one picture of myself from my christening, which is probably one of the first baby pictures I have of myself. And like I always looked at that, like knowing it was me, but not feeling connected to me, if that
Yeah.
makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
And so, I was just like, okay, this is just another crazy function of the story that I'm trying to piece together, the story that I'm trying to understand, the story that makes up who I am. And and funnily enough, there is a name in the non-identifying paperwork.
Really?
Somebody, and I don't know who, they called me baby Alicia. So I did have a name, but I don't know where that came from, because that part of my
You weren't
story,
officially adopted till you were like 9 months, or
9 months
correct?
old, that's right.
Okay, so maybe foster parents or
Yeah,
something maybe named you, because what do they can't just not call you something,
just
right?
baby.
Yeah, a baby.
Hello, little baby.
Yeah. So did
And
you
I was
always
a
know?
little baby.
Yeah, you were. Did you always know you were adopted, or do you remember being told, or?
Yeah, I do. And I say we because it's my brother and I don't ever remember not knowing.
Mhm.
We knew from the time we could remember that we were adopted. So, early on, it wasn't a secret. It was something that was, just open knowledge in our family, both like our, immediate family, but also extended family and friends. Like my parents didn't make it a secret. But when I was 5, my mom got pregnant and had my younger brother who has Down syndrome. And that really changed the focus of our family, understandably,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
But also that was 1982. It was just after deinstitutionalization. And they were really scrambling to figure out like how to meet his needs, like what he was going to need, because
Mhm.
we didn't know.
Yeah.
And, so after Frank was born, we just kind of stopped talking about adoption in our family.
Now, is he biological to your parents?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, totally understandable. Um, I want to talk about when you started discovering writing and how that was kind of a surprising but huge impact on you. I mean, you were pretty young. I believe you were like at 14 when a
Yeah.
teacher kind of encouraged you. Um, Tell us what your writing catharsis looked like, and um, where were you when you started, and kind of where did that lead you along the way?
Yeah. So yeah, I was 14 and had like super big, crazy emotions, like lots of big feelings, lots of overwhelming feelings all of the time, lots of just exploding tears. Because that's my default reaction. I'm a crier. That's my stress reaction. That's my grief reaction. That's my anger reaction. That's my overwhelm reaction. That's my overtired reaction at all of the things, right? But, at 14, I had no concept of the impact that adoption had on my life. It wasn't even on my radar, right? I just was continually overflowing, and feeling really sad and really confused so much of the time. And I had a really smart and insightful teacher and coach, Mr. Anthony, George Anthony is his name. And I'm still in touch with him, which is a beautiful thing about my life, who said to me, did you ever think about writing poems? And I was like, what? No. I thought it was the dumbest thing I had ever heard, right? Like, I was like, no, that's silly. Who writes poems? Come on. And he was like, well, just think about it. And then like a couple of weeks later, we were sitting in his office talking about something. And he's like, hey, can I share something with you? And I was like, yeah, sure. And he read me this poem that he had written when he was in college that had been published in a college literary magazine. And he told me the whole story about how he wrote this poem and why he wrote this poem and what it meant. And I remember like having a real paradigm shift in that moment of going like, oh, well, if this man, right? And I had these very gendered, stereotypical gender role ideas at the time. I have since moved way past them. And I thought if this man can write this poem, like maybe it's not so stupid. Like maybe there's something here. And so I got this little notebook, this little pretty notebook. I went out, on, the way home from school. I stopped in the little local stationery store that was in my town after I got off the bus. And I bought this notebook and I started writing. And it was really private. Like it was not anything that I shared with anyone for many, many years. It was just my own space where I didn't even like sit down to consciously like, now I'm going to write about this. I would just feel so overwhelmed and I'd be like, okay. And a thought would come to me and I just grab a pen and I would write, and at the time that experience was just cathartic in the way that as long as, and I say this in my one woman show Unmothered, it helped me find some release for as long as my pen moved across the page, right? I just knew that when I wrote, I felt better. And that I felt like that everything felt a little bit less raw and a little bit less intense. And so it was a lifeline for me early on. And for many, many years, whenever things felt really big or overwhelming, I knew that I could put a pen to paper and write a poem or 10 poems, and express whatever that thing inside me was that needed to get out. Where that took me all of these years later is incredible. And I didn't really know at the time that what I was doing was going to turn into what it has, right? And I discovered writing and healing when I got into grad school. And there's kind of two stories there, but I'll pause in case you have another.
Okay. It's funny because I talk to people about coming on the show all the time, lots of adoptees. And there's been a few times where, in fact, today it happened where I get an email from somebody and they've scheduled, we're in the process, it's coming up like within a week. And something shifts and they're like, I can't do this now. I can't tell my story. It's going to hurt this person. It's going to hurt that person. Even though it's really what they want to do is share, something like that comes up and they just can't do it. And so when I was reading your book, I was thinking that's a way, because, the guests on my show usually say, oh my gosh, it was so healing even for me, just telling my story. So I get sad when I hear that, but I totally understand, where they're coming from. Totally get it. But I'm thinking this is a way for them to channel and heal privately. And, maybe at some point they will be able to come tell their story. But, I thought wow, this would be something that they could do in the meantime to kind of tell their story and get some feelings out and heal.
100%. I mean, and that, that's really the reason why I wrote the book. And I say it in the introduction that like, it's my gift to the adoptee community to have a resource. And that comes very much out of not only my sort of, at this point, really lifelong, it's over 30 years now of writing, from the time I started at 14 and now I'm 47. And like, that is decades of writing and discovering myself in my writing. And the book is, what is really meant to be a resource for folks that need to give themselves permission. And that's actually part of the whole migrating toward wholeness process that I lay out in the book and that I've developed over the last, 7 or 8 years, which is that we need to give ourselves permission to tell our stories. And sometimes there is a cost, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's safer to stay silent. And I recognize that, right? So what are the options if right now is not the time? You can put a pen to paper. You can open a Word document that you don't show anybody and do this as a private activity. Because if the story doesn't go somewhere and if the internal feelings don't go somewhere, if we don't give them a container, right? They live inside of us. And that's where the sickness comes from. That's where the unresolved grief, we know trauma lives in the body. And so I talk about how this healing process of using writing helps us to migrate embodied trauma. And it does, because we're taking the words outside of our bodies and giving them a place to live outside of ourselves, even if we don't share it with anyone yet. Right. Just giving ourselves permission to speak in whatever way we have access to is the first step in the process.
Yeah. There's different ways to share your story. It's not always, doesn't have to be publicly.
No.
So you talk about in the book, cognitive behavior therapy and why it may not be helpful in some cases when we're dealing with pre-verbal trauma. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So this also really comes out of my experience of having been in therapy for, the better part of 15 years. And, regular CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, right, which is traditional therapy modality that many people utilize and are familiar with and have experience either on one side or the other, right? And in those 15 years with the same therapist, never once talking about the fact that I was adopted, never once like that being even a consideration as the, sort of the source of, I'm going to put this in quotes, my issues, right? My issues with relationships, my issues with finishing things, my issue, like making the kinds of choices I was making. I mean, and when I started reading the adoption literature, as I was finishing, my master's degree and sort of starting my own healing journey, and then, sort of thinking about maybe I'm going to get my PhD. And then when I got into my PhD program, I really started reading the literature, and I was like, oh, I'm not crazy. This all really lines up with my experience and my story. And and with me going to this therapist for 15 years, I stopped going because I hit a point where every time I left, I felt worse. I felt worse than when I walked in that door. And I'm like, well, this is not helping me. And of course, at the time, I didn't realize that I needed something different. And also I didn't realize yet that all of the stuff that I was continually dealing with was connected to being adopted and was connected to my pre-verbal trauma that had gone acknowledged and unaddressed. And it took me another several years before, I actually went to an adoptee conference. I went to the American Adoption Congress conference, I think in 2018. I think it was 2018. It might've been 2019. And that was the first time that I had come together with other adoptees, many of whom were also therapists, and started having these conversations. And somebody was like, said to me, you might be having somatic memories, and have you ever thought about that? And like, just really eye-opening. And then I started, kind of putting the dots together. And then when I got home, I realized that I needed different kind of therapy, and that I had not had adoption competent or trauma competent therapy. And because I had the intellectual understanding of those things, and I had done the reading and the research, and I understood, right, that the trauma informed folks were like, no, cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't work because we can't talk ourselves out of something we don't have words for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I realized I needed a brain-based therapy, and I sought that out. And I was very lucky that I was able to find that. But it shouldn't take anybody 40 years,
Yeah.
That's the tragic part of it.
Well, unfortunately, we don't validate ourselves in that way until we're 40 or 50, most of us,
True.
Yeah. So I want to talk about identity a little bit, or lack of identity for the adoptee. Talk about your personal experience with your identity, and do you think that adoptees can regain our authentic selves?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And yes, I do. And it's also a journey, right? Like, so much of this experience as adoptees, of my experience as an adopted person, and like the experience that I share with other adoptees over the, many years that I've been able to be friends with and also work with so many people in our community, is the knowledge that we can find a sense of authenticity, but it takes work, right? And it takes a lot of support. And I say that because I have done it. I have worked really hard to figure out who I am in this world, and what I need, and how to take up space, right? How not to continue to disappear into the background. And it's all part of this healing journey, and none of it is linear, right? That's another thing that I talk a lot about, is the fact that healing isn't linear, and neither is coming into that sense of self. But that's the idea behind migrating toward wholeness. For me, that idea of migrating toward wholeness is really about finding authenticity, and finding home in ourselves. And because I think I have spent so much of my life chasing things that are external to me, because I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know where I came from, and I couldn't find answers to things that I was focused on all of these things outside, because I couldn't make sense of the internal chaos. And then when I started to figure out the answers that I could figure out, some of the puzzle pieces started to click into place. And then the pieces that I didn't know, and I still don't know, I have been able to rewrite those parts of my story in a way that makes sense for me, so that I can continue to inhabit that sense of wholeness, knowing that I am capable of being and doing and making choices, right? And having agency over my own life. And part of that agency is telling my story.
Right. Another thing that you talk about in the book is attachment and bonding. What's the difference?
I think the difference is that, like, attachment is sort of that, like, what's the word I want? Like, we think like that's the goal is attachment, but when we don't have a healthy attachment, so like, we don't have a healthy attachment early on, then it becomes really hard to distinguish the difference between like attachment and then being able to like have a healthy bond with someone. And so, like, for example, I guess the best way I can talk about this is through a story. Is like, I had such severe separation anxiety, right? Because I had such disorganized and anxious attachment. Like when I couldn't stay away at college because I didn't know how to separate from my family, right? My identity at that point was very much tied to my role in my family, which was as the caretaker. I was taking care of my mom. I was taking care of my younger brother. So I was very attached to them. And because they needed me, it was like, Velcro, right? Sort of a Velcro thing. So think about like attachment as Velcro. Like we could stick together and that's fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a firm bond or hold, right? Like it can be broken, right? We can rip that Velcro apart. Whereas the bonding, and this is, like adoption 101, like we didn't get that with our first mothers, right? We didn't get held immediately. We didn't get breastfed. We didn't get the skin to skin contact. And so it can become really hard to form significant bonds with people without having that early experience. And it took me fully into my 30s to start to differentiate between the two, and I was attached unhealthily to a lot of people and a lot of things, but didn't have the necessary bonds for successful relationships. So I would say that the differentiation for me is about like the bonding is about and it ties into authenticity, right? Like I think, as I've come more into myself, I have been able to create successful bonds in my relationships because I'm no longer hiding and I'm no longer afraid. And I can take up space.
Yeah, that's huge. So in the book, you say, as a society, we struggle with the idea that adoption is traumatic. Why do you think that is?
Because, Western society, the United States, we like a happy ending, right? We like the Disney story, and we don't have space in our culture for grief. We don't have space in our culture for anything that doesn't feel neat or tidy. Those kinds of things are too hard. And so, just based on my personal experience, also my academic and intellectual training, like I see it in the literature, but I see it like in media that we don't like, nobody talks about trauma, right? And like nobody wants to like look at the dark side of things, which is that when you separate a baby and its mother, like there's irreparable damage there, right? But we're not going to talk about that because it's uncomfortable. And I think really the reason I wrote that and the reason I think that this to be true is that people don't like being uncomfortable. Right? We like to stay comfortable. And I say we, meaning like in general, right? Like, but for me, like we don't grow by staying comfortable. And so much of my own journey and so much of my own healing has come from being really fucking uncomfortable, and having some really uncomfortable conversations, really difficult conversations, and like getting through them and realizing, okay, this isn't going to kill me. I'm not dead. I'm not dying. I might feel like I'm dying. Right?
Do you ever feel like you're the only one struggling and feeling stuck? We all carry hidden burdens, but there's a way to find relief. Somatic mindful guided imagery can help unlock your inner peace and heal past traumas. Discover the power within. Visit somatichealingjourneys.com because everyone deserves a lighter load.
For me, I feel like if someone finds out through conversation, somewhere that I'm adopted, it's almost like, let's change the subject really quick. We don't want to talk about that. That might make you uncomfortable, meaning me uncomfortable. But really, it's like, no, I want to talk about it. And ask me questions. I don't get offended. To me, that's educating people,
right.
And, I've had a lot of people be like, oh, wow, thank you for putting that perspective on it. I never thought of it that way, But yeah, I think
Yeah.
people really do get uncomfortable and they're just like, okay, well, you have great parents, so you're okay, right? Next
Yeah. It turned
subject.
out, right. It turned out okay, right? Mhm.
Next subject.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same reason people don't want to talk about race, right?
Yeah.
They don't,
Yeah.
and I mean, partly they don't know the questions to ask or have
Mhm.
the context, right?
Well,
And there,
yeah. Yeah, well,
there
even in
is,
grief, when someone passes, a lot of times the person who had the loved one pass, they want to talk about that person. And everyone else is like, well, I don't want to bring him up because it's going to make her sad, when really they want to talk about it.
yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of it is we just don't know what to say. That's
Hmm.
a lot of it. Um, we talk about, or you talked about how adoption has uh, taught you some superpowers that you had. Talk about that a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I have developed an extraordinary amount of empathy. I mean, my adoptee superpowers, being really empathetic. I'm really good at reading people and rooms and energy,
Yeah.
um, and knowing, just knowing things about situations and about people, and being able to kind of feel my way through things. It I'm also a really good holder of space. Um, for other people, I'm not always good at holding space for myself. It's a thing I'm working on, right? Because we're always in works in progress, and I always remind myself of that.
Yeah.
Um, and it's because I, over the course of my life, I grew up with a brother with a disability. I'm adopted, and I have always had to be the chameleon in the room, right? To be able to fit into any situation. I did theater for a long time, which was the other sort of lifeline besides writing that really helped me. And those are all skills that helped me to form this extraordinary ability to be in community with other people and feel their feelings, and have insights into sort of the human experience that a lot of other people don't have.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, why do we go through anything hard is, to learn and grow and find out what gifts that brings, because I think everything that you go through does become a superpower if you can kind of shift that mindset and look at it a little bit differently. What do you hope that people gain from this book?
I really want people who read the book and use it as a tool to gain some insight into themselves, to gain some power and agency over their stories in order to find a greater sense of wholeness. I want them to find healing, and healing, is one of those words that we talk a lot about these days, especially in the adoptee community. And what is healing, and what does it mean, and can we heal even? And I think it's a really individual experience, right? Because what healing looks like for me looks very different for you, Melissa, right? Like, and for
Exactly.
every other person.
Hmm.
And so we have to think about healing as an individual experience. And so that's why I use the term migrating toward wholeness, because maybe healing doesn't feel like the right word for you, but maybe a greater sense of wholeness is the healing journey, right? To find a greater sense of wholeness through the stories that you are able to tell, through the insights that you are able to gain by doing the writing exercises in the book, and by connecting. I mean, so much of the work that I've laid out in the book, and also the work that I do in my small groups and one-on-one coaching with adoptees, is about making a deeper connection to ourselves, so that we can more deeply connect to other people. And when we do that, we become a little bit more whole and a little bit more authentic, and sort of like the Velveteen Rabbit, right? Like, we become real,
Yeah.
even if we're
Yeah.
rubbed a little bit bare in some places.
Yeah. Well, we met on Beth Syverson's healing database. We had a meeting, and that's where I met you. And you kind of did a short little quick workshop with us. And I don't consider myself a writer, or that really helps me. But I was like, that exercise that you did, taking home and taking each letter and like making a sentence. I just found it on a sticky note the other day because I don't know about you, but my desk, I have like a stack of sticky notes aside. So like I need to go through these. And I was like, oh, that's that thing I wrote from your prompt, from when we met. And I was looking at it and I was like, wow, I mean, I was like blown away by what I wrote just in 5 minutes. I'll try and read it. So you take HOME and you write a sentence. So I put home is me, myself, and I. Only I am home. My only true authentic refuge. Enter with compassion and kindness. And I was like, wow, I wrote that. And that, I still think about when I look at that, uh, just those 4 lines, how deep I could go with each one. And I think that's kind of what you were saying to do, now look at that one line and then go deeper with it and keep writing. So just such a simple exercise. And the more I look at it, the more I see the depth of each line that I wrote. So that was so cool for someone who is not really consider themselves a writer. So I just kind of wanted to share that with you. But kind of coming to an end here, talk about your award-winning solo show Unmothered and your Migrating Toward Wholeness work with adoptees.
Yeah. So Unmothered, it came out of my dissertation. I had the really fortunate experience of going to a grad program that was really interested in both creativity and social justice, and making us scholar practitioners so that we, had the theoretical knowledge for whatever it was we were exploring, but that we could do something with it out in the world. And so both these parts of my work are connected to that. So Unmothered, I originally wrote and performed as part of my dissertation, which was Unmothered, a story of adoption and patriarchy and auto-ethnography, auto-ethnographic narrative. I don't even know dissertation titles.
Right.
Anyway, auto-ethnography was the research method. Embodied performance was the other research method. And it was really about using personal storytelling and performance as vehicles for social change and empathy building, to get people to think differently about adoption by putting myself into conversation with an audience through the lens of my story. And so Unmothered is a really deeply personal exploration of all of my early not all of my early, but lots of my early writing. The show itself is I would say the narrative thread is really the poems. That's kind of the narrative thread, and the emotional glue are all of these poems, because I went back through my poems and used them to create a sort of timeline and a map of different parts of my story. And then I linked them together with some narrative text. And it has evolved a little bit over time. The original production was about an hour and a half long. It was the story I needed to tell at the time. And then I took a couple of years break because COVID, and we all did. And then I revised it and restaged it with the help of my brilliant and beautiful partner, Jeremy Sortor, who is just, a really beautiful life partner, but also a really beautiful creative partner. And he has helped me through the entire process of staging it using Fitzmaurice voice work, which is a trauma-informed breath and body practice for actors. And we used that as part of our rehearsal process to work on the text and to figure out, the movement, which is not necessarily choreographed, but it is, it is an integral part of the show. And then we, sort of looked at the script again ahead of going to the United Solo Theater Festival at the end of 2022, and did some judicious cutting and, reworked the script a little bit to kind of organize the story in the way that it could be told now. And I performed it at the end of 2022 at the United Solo Theater Festival in New York, and I won Best Autobiographical Show. And I'm super proud of that. And since then, I have continued to perform it in various places. I was part of Operation Foglift for a short time and got to perform it in New York City. Just recently performed it for the Adoptive and Foster Family Coalition of New York's annual conference. And that was a really, really cool experience to be part of, and just a powerful audience to get in front of, because there were so many adoptive parents there who needed to see it, right? Who needed to be able to
what was the feedback from them on that?
So many people thanked me for doing what I do and for telling my story in the way that I tell it, for helping them understand their kids better. And for the adoptees that have seen it, there's, like we started this conversation, right, where you said you read the book and you felt so validated. People that have seen my show tell me, like, oh my God, you just put words to all of the things I have felt my whole life. Now I can start to talk about them because you said it, right? And that's the point of that, right? And so, like, having the ability, and that's the other superpower I have, right? Words. Is being able to find the words to say the things, right? And it's because it was silenced for so long, and I finally was like, you know what? F this. I have to get this out. And because my undergraduate degree is in theater and I have a background as a performer, it felt like a really natural progression when I was thinking about what ultimately my dissertation was going to be. Like, what am I going to do? And I was like, oh, what if I write a one-woman show? And I did. Awesome. And it has, it is, I'm so glad I did, because it's such an important gift and tool. It's a gift to other adoptees who may not have the words to explain the things, but for us to be seen and heard and validated. To begin to tell the stories. And that's also really where the Migrating Toward Wholeness is the other outgrowth of all of that work, is recognizing that I had been using writing for so many years to manage all of these really intense emotions, and then knowing that there was a whole field in which therapeutic writing is proven to have mental and physical health benefits. Likewise, specifically poetry can be really therapeutic. And so I started, so part of my dissertation work is connected to that as well. But after I graduated, I have been connected with the Rudd Adoption Research Institute since 2019, when I was part of their summer research program. And so I've maintained that really wonderful relationship. And they were doing a year-long virtual conference about adult adoptees. And they were like, we want you to be part of this because our other one got canceled. And I was supposed to have performed an excerpt from Unmothered, but that didn't happen. And we had to shift because of online. And they were like, let's have these conversations. Let's talk about it. And they were really interested in my writing and healing work. They were like, we're really interested in this. Can you do something with that? And I was like, yeah, sure. And then it evolved into what is now, the pilot of Migrating Toward Wholeness, where I brought together a group of 11 adult adoptees, all varying, ages from 20s to 60s. And we spent 7 weeks together writing. And it was a very emergent process. And I didn't have like, here's the series of prompts that we're going to use. I just kind of intuitively came into that space and decided that it was going to be driven by the conversations that we had and what was coming up from our personal stories. And what that 7 weeks, what unfolded in that 7 weeks was then the process that I have outlined in the book. And then the final chapter of the book actually goes into a little bit more depth about that original group and sort of pays homage to those folks who really laid the groundwork for the work that I'm now continuing to do, using this process that they trusted me to develop with them.
That's awesome. Wow. So in closing, what do you want struggling adoptees to know?
I want you to know that it gets better and that there is help if you look for it, that there are those of us out there that are here to connect with you, to be lifelines. I want them to know that they can reach out to me at any time. I would tell people, I think of me as a resource and a connection point. People email me all the time and they're like, hey, and then, we either have these long email conversations or we get on Zoom and they're like, can we connect, and I want adoptees to know that wherever you are, it's okay. And that if you're feeling really lost or really confused or like there isn't any hope, please reach out.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of us here in this community that are here to hold you.
Yeah. Well, just like you were saying with the writing and the acting, when you were in the depths of, whatever you were going through as a teenager, just trying to survive, those things helped you. And then those became your superpowers and helped you develop what you're doing today and finding so much joy in doing and sharing with all of us. So I just want to thank you for coming on the show today, Liz. And where can we find you and your book and whatever you're up to next?
Yeah, easiest way to find me and what's going on next is my website, which is super easy, lizdebetta.com. You can also find me on Facebook. Dr. Liz DeBetta is my page, or Instagram, drliz.debetta.
Okay, well, all of that will be in the show notes. So if anyone wants to get in touch with Liz, look there for that. And listeners, just thanks for joining us today. As always, take what you need and leave what you don't. And always remember to mind your own karma. And I will see you next time.
This podcast is created for educational purposes by the telling of adoption experiences. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host or Mind Your Own Karma.